Good morning everyone and welcome again. Today we continue always with our first literary genre or type, which is fiction, right? And we'll try to explore its different elements. Now, why do we study these elements, right, of fiction? Because if you want to analyze, or study critically, right, not superficially, any text, whether it is fiction or poetry or even drama, we have to consider, the different elements, of each type or genre and study them critically. Critically, it means we try to analyze them profoundly using the appropriate methodology, right, to grasp the content and the message, right, of this literary work. Now, fiction in itself has its own elements, which distinguish it from the other genres like drama and poetry. Now, if you wanted to study or analyze critically any piece of fiction, we have to consider, right, these elements and study them critically, carefully, profoundly too. So, for fiction, it has nearly 5 elements. All right, 5 elements critics, agreed upon as the most important elements and fundamentals, right, of this genre, which is prose fiction. In fact, we would like to explore, right, or cover these elements in the form of answering questions. Answering questions. It means we can study these elements through highlighting or raising a set of questions, right, for any piece of fiction. For example, we can start with the question when and where, right? Then the question of who, then the question of how, then the question of who, how, and also what, and also finally we have why. Why? So all these questions represent the elements of fiction we should always consider, and take into account whenever we study any piece of fiction. Now, the first 2 question words, when and where, they represent the place and time. We mean the setting. Clear? Who is acting, who is participating, clear, in this story or piece of fiction? Who represents the characters? Clear? How is the story narrated? Right, how is the events how are the events recounted in this story? So how represents the point of view? The point of view. What is going on in the story? What events, what incidents, right, are here mentioned, right, in the course of the story events? So here what represents the plot in all its parts. And why is this story written? All right, what is the, if you can say, the message that this writer wants to convey through his piece of fiction? Why represents the theme, the underlying message from the work? Theme. So these are, as you see, the elements of fiction, which represent the answer of these questions. We need always to problematize whenever we encounter or read any text. Any piece of fiction, we have always to try to answer the questions, right? Try to analyze this question, this text, try to criticize also this text, not superficially, but profoundly and critically in the light of these elements and in the light of the answers of this set of questions. So, here is only a brief introduction about the elements of fiction and why they matter, okay, too much, all right, when we study any piece of fiction, all right. And these elements, as we said before, they are unique and special for fiction, all right. They are not the same ones we find in poetry or we find in drama, clear? So these are special, all right, you can say components, special elements, special constituents of any piece of fiction, whether it is novel or novella or short story or any other form also of fiction. Good. Today we'll start first by highlighting the first element, which is the answer of the question when and where, which is the setting. The setting. Now, when we say the setting of a story or of any piece of fiction, of course, when indicates time, clear, and where indicates place. All right, time and the place. All right, time and the place. Or also we can say time and physical location. All right, critics sometimes use for the place, physical location. All right, as a term which is used synonymously. Okay, instead of place. Sometimes even they use space also, all right, to indicate, all right, the place. Now here the terms differ, but always for the same, all right, concept, which is place. So here we have the three, or the two major elements within setting, all right, which are time and place, or what we call physical location. Physical location. Now, when we say setting of a story, it means, okay, the time when this story takes place, all right, or when the events of the story takes place, and the place, all right, when this story, okay, or these story events happen, okay, happen. Now, when we say setting is time and physical location or place. Now, for some texts, okay, these two, if you can say, elements or tools are not enough, okay, are not enough to cover the setting of the story, which of course helps us to understand better the plot and the characters. That's why, right, other critics added another important element within setting, which is what we call the general environment. The general environment. What do they mean by general environment? Now, in a story, we have a series of events, okay, that take place, right? Time, it happened, for example, in the past or in the future or in the present, and the place in that or that area. But these two elements are not enough to understand better, right, the theme of the story, better the reflection of the setting on the characters. Okay, it's not also enough to interrelate the different elements of this story, I mean the place and the time characters. That's why sometimes we find many other factors and elements which participate and contribute, okay, to the creation, okay, of the story. Mainly what we call general environment, especially the social, cultural, and political circumstances of the story. So these also conditions or circumstances, all right, which represent the context, right, in which the story events happen or take place, is also another important part, okay, and element within setting. So from now on, when we say setting, we mean time, physical location, place or space also, and also those different conditions, all right, which accompany or which contextualize, okay, the events of the story, all right, and accompany the events of the story. Clear? Good. Now, as you know that here we have the setting as the first element of fiction, but critics also use many other synonymous terms for it. Sometimes they call it also milieu. It can be also called milieu, right, of the story. Context, right, and even the story world. The story world, okay. All these terms are used by critics to indicate the first element of fiction, which is the setting, the when and where the events take place. All right, good. Now, the importance of setting is very crucial, okay, or the setting is very crucial element because usually writers, when they start their stories, they first start by introducing the setting of the story, okay, they first highlight, right, and mention, all right, the time, okay, and the place and the conditions where the story events, okay, take place. That's why it's very important. And the first or the main benefit we can get from this element is that the setting deepens our understanding of the story, okay, and the characters. When we learn about the place, clear, and the time of the story, right. So this will enrich us as readers, okay, about the context, the conditions, okay, in which these events happen in the story or in the novel, in the piece of fiction. Also will enrich us about also more information, okay, and more understanding about the characters, right. And so on. For example, if we read a novel about, I don't know, Charles Dickens's novels in the 18th century, in that conservative, I don't know, Victorian, okay, society in London, it's not the same when we read, okay, a novel, for example, in the 1920s, okay, by a black African writer. So here, the setting, the time, and the place, right, also helps us understand better, okay, the psychology of the characters, also the plot and the storyline of the story better and better. Clear? For example, we take Great Expectations of Charles Dickens, which takes place, all right, during the 18th century, all right, in London. Here we explore, for example, different themes, okay, about ambition of that character in that society, okay, in London and so on, right? How he, when he was poor and became rich, and he, right, reached his expectations with a kind of disillusionment and so on. But if you go to another setting, okay, of another novel, for example, Ralph Ellison, the 1920s, also with his masterpiece, for example, Invisible Man, with that American society which is divided, okay, racially between the blacks and the whites, with that trauma of racism, clear, with that, or those social and cultural ideologies of segregation, okay, we find here another message, another theme, and another understanding, okay, and reading of this piece of fiction, right? Also, for example, if we read, I don't know, Jack Kerouac's On the Road, novel written after the 1950s about, I don't know, a gang of youths who, I don't know, roam the roads, okay, to look for their, I don't know, spiritual, I don't know, fulfillment and so on, sorry, and to achieve, okay, what they seek in terms of that sense of ecstasy, sense of psychological and spiritual satisfaction and stability, or within that American materialistic society. Here also we have another understanding and another grasp, right, of this novel and its events and characters within that, okay, hedonistic society of America after the war, which was economically prosperous, okay, and also under the dogma of consumerism. So all these conditions of time, place, and those cultural and social circumstances contribute to our understanding of both the plot, the story itself, and the characters. Okay, and the characters. Also, another important benefit of the setting is it steers our imagination as readers. The setting steers, means moves our imagination as readers. For example, if we read a novel, right, or story about, for example, the novel of The Book of the Jungle, of Mowgli in the forest with the animals and so on, here, right, we start imagining how this character is living his daily events. We will live with him. Okay, the setting makes us live with this character and the story by ourselves. Clear? Become involved, immersed in the storyline of this story. For example, also if we read, I don't know, a piece of fiction about sci-fi, science fiction, in the, for example, Star Wars, right, in the future, we start imagining, reading, and at the same time imagining how the place, how the characters will be, how the environment, okay, will be in that story, and so on. Clear? Also, a novel from an African writer, for example, Ngugi wa Thiong'o in Kenya, who was suffering from that, I don't know, post-colonial constraints, okay, within that black society, which was really, okay, deceived and tricked, right, by the false, the false promises of independence, and how he depicts in his society, okay, after the independence, the suffering of the black African, right, to get his independence, his true freedom, right. Here also we start living with him that trauma, that suffering of his people, okay, and to what extent, right, this conditions, right, and suffering create a clear, okay, view about that era, and also about the plot and the characters of the novel in that era. Clear? And all these, okay, place and time and conditions, and also conditions, they create to us what we call the mood or the atmosphere of the novel or the story. For example, some stories, they have that dark atmosphere. Clear, like for example, Whip-Not Child. Okay, Whip-Not Child by Ngugi. At the end, you find that, I don't know, gloomy and hopeless, right? Ending with regard to that society, with its conditions of suffering, of inferiority, of tyranny, clear, and so on, right? When there is no gleam of hope left, right, to that society and his people, right, in that society, African black society in Kenya. For example, also if you read any other story, for example, Great Gatsby, with that hedonistic and well-off characters, okay, who are living in that influence of everything, right? Here we find that the atmosphere and the mood of the story is a bit, if you can say, expressing a kind of materialism, a kind of, I don't know, running after that dream of America, and so on. Clear? Also, if we read, I don't know, any other Grapes of Wrath for John Steinbeck, okay, John Steinbeck, when he depicted the era of Dust Bowl in the 1930s, with that circumstances of the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, okay, the Saharan, invasion of the agricultural lands, the suffering of the farmers in that era, clear. that kind of determinism. Now here also we have that the setting here makes us understand that there is something hopeless. Okay, something you can say pointless, a kind of don't know, sterility. Right, sterility. The writer wants to reflect through his novel. Okay, through his novel. Now, there's also another element I would like to mention here, which is also situated, okay, within the physical location. Physical location, right? It's called the local canon. Local canon. What do we mean by local canon? When we say local canon, we mean those regional, right, or local details, markers, okay, which we find in, I don't know, in that story concerning the accent of speech, way of dressing, I don't know, the slang used in the story, traditions, right, and many other details, okay, which reflect, okay, and contribute to understanding better, right, that context of the story, that context of the story. For example, if we read Mark Twain's, I don't know, novels, right, you will find that he used this regional, okay, dialect or I don't know, accent to reflect and to impact, right, the reader, right, with that touch of, you can say, truthful representation, okay, of that society and of those conditions he is talking about in his story, okay, story. So the local color is very important, okay, part of the physical location. Those are the markers, those are the distinct features, details which characterize, okay, a particular story with its characters and make readers understand it better and better, right? Make them live within that atmosphere of this story, Good. Also, another element within the notion of setting, we have, as you know, we are used to listen to our grandmothers when they tell us about those ancient stories of them. Right, some of them, of course, are only imaginary stories. Now, some of these stories, they don't contain, okay, really a clear, right, setting. When they say once upon a time, long time ago, and so on. Right, like what we have in folk tales, right. We have also in fairy tales and so on. So in these types of stories, the setting is not clearly stated. It is vague, right? It is vague and it is on purpose, if you can say, hidden, right? Hidden. Why? In order to give that story a timeless and universal dimension. Timeless and universal dimension. So, in these stories, when we have a setting which is not clearly stated, which is vague and general, right? We call this type of settings, we call it, number one, it is called backdrop. Backdrop setting, number one. It is a setting which is not clearly stated, it's vague and general, right? Once upon a time, there was in the past, long time ago, and so on, to give yourself the story that that universal and timeless dimension, right? Dimension. On the other hand, we have the common settings we know and stories which include the setting, I mean time, place, and those conditions, either explicitly or implicitly. Right, for example, this story began, okay, I was born in this place, and after the war, things like that, it's clearly stated. Sometimes you find only some clues, right? For example, we have, I don't know, reference to trees in a place, it means it is the forest, it's clear, okay, and so on. So when the story or the setting is clearly stated in a novel or story, right, either explicitly or implicitly, we call this type of setting integral setting. Integral setting. So these are the two types of setting. Backdrop is not clearly stated, right? It's vague. And the integral is clearly stated. Time and place are mentioned in the story either explicitly or implicitly. Alright, good. So here is the structure or the representative diagram which represents the different elements of our first element of fiction, which is the setting. Right, I hope that you have understood, okay, the different components under the heading of setting, and why, okay, it matters so much to understand and learn about the setting of any story, to deepen our understanding of the story, its plot, characters, and to also understand the theme, right, the underlying message, okay, the writer wants to convey through this story. Through this story. So, thanks so much for your attention, and see you in, inshallah, another lesson with another element of fiction. Now, after answering when and where, we'll try to answer, so in our next lesson, who, I mean the characters. So, see you then.